Life as We Know It with Tom Walton.
Occasionally we remember the good old days with more fondness than perhaps they deserved. Take church. Every Sunday the elderly couple down the road would pick me up, an 8-year-old kid, and take me to church. I'd sit with them in the pew and feign interest. Hey, I was 8 years old. I was allowed to feign. My mom would stay home with my younger siblings. At church, my mind wandered during my hour of forced idleness. What about that sign on the wall that announced today's attendance compared to last week? Did we need to be reminded there were more of us last time? Did the minister need to see that? He was just trying to make a living. No doubt he was underpaid for keeping his congregation on the straight and narrow. On the other hand, he had a decent house to live in, rent-free. It was called the parsonage, and while it was never going to grace the cover of House Beautiful, it was a roof over his head, even if it did leak. Also featured prominently on the sign on the wall was the amount of money in last week's offering, compared to the week before that. This was a clear attempt to embarrass every member of the congregation. Suddenly, the 2 $1 bills Mom had given me to toss in the plate seemed so inadequate. I felt cheap, but I was just an unemployed child, so I got a pass. The announcements preceded the sermon and were always more interesting. Who had to go to the hospital and who got out? Who died and who did not? Who would step in as guest pastor when the minister took a brief vacation? The sermon itself was generally boring. I knew when the sermon began that I had 15 more minutes to endure, unless the governor called with a reprieve. He never did. I always looked forward to the guest pastor, hoping against hope that the sermon would improve. Invariably it did not, at least not to impatient mini-me. Lest I paint with too broad a brush, I should note the one exception. The guest minister was droning on about something or other, and all I heard was pray, good, chapter, verse, things like that. In those days, I only picked up about every fourth word. A sermon was like a radio station. You can't quite tune in. Suddenly, after maybe 5 minutes, he announced that he was done. Perhaps he'd noticed that nearly everybody had nodded off. I didn't care why he was finished. I was just happy to hear it. God had heard my prayer after all. It was like Ralphie finally getting his Daisy Red Ryder BB gun, or the day in 3rd grade when they announced school would let out early for a teachers' meeting. But before anyone could leave the church, we had to endure the handshake line. Nobody got out without shaking the pastor's hand. I felt like slipping the minister a note just to shake things up. Help me! I don't know these people! I recall briefly entertaining the notion at that tender age of becoming a preacher when I grew up. What a great job! You show up on Sunday morning, you remind everybody that God wants us all to be good people, you lead a verse or two of the old rugged cross, and then you've got 6 straight days off. Had I embraced that brief temptation to become a minister, there would have been some changes, I can tell you that. Well, for one thing, I would have eliminated the handshake line. I don't think God would have minded.
Life as We Know It is written and hosted by Tom Walton and is a production of WGTE Public Media. Life as We Know It with Tom Walton can be heard on WGTE FM 91 every Monday afternoon during All Things Considered at 5:44 p.m. Or hear past episodes at wgte.org/life.